Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of the program. And with us to discuss these issues in studio, we have the Member of Parliament for South East St. Andrew, Julian Robinson, Member of Parliament for St. James West Central, and Attorney General Marlene Malahoo Fort. We also have with us Opposition Senator Dr. Andre Horne and Government Senator Matthew Samuda. Before we get into the discussion, though, so what does Parliament do, or what is it supposed to do? Kalisha Williams has this overview.
New estimates.
Debating.
Now that we have not only attained the revenue estimates, now that we have surpassed the revenue estimates, now that we have surpassed it for year one, for year two, for year three, now you're coming back and say, oops, it was me, it was because of what I did.
Passing laws.
Those in favor? Against? The noes have it.
Holding government accountable.
Mr. Chairman, it is disgraceful, to say the least. This is the Parliament of the country. And Mr. Myrie, you are invited to come to share with the Parliament what transpired in your public duty functioning, not in your private capacity. You, Mr. Myrie, are you a director of PCJ? Still.
Member, I did answer that earlier. Yes, I am.
You are. Mm-hmm. Were you at any time assistant to the former Minister of Energy?
Public records will show, member, that I was.
These are some of the main functions of a parliament. But then there's this.
Mr. Speaker, I would urge you, the member having asked for 2 minutes to conclude these two. I'm going to ask you. Or this one and this one. Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, I'm going to order. He is a blatant liar. A point of order.
Mr. Paul, let us see.
Mr. Speaker,
sit down and stop talking about point of order. You have no order, let alone a point.
You're standing on a point of order.
Yes.
Then state the point
of order. If let
not,
alone a point.
Let the minister finish.
It is in breach of the standing order for him to, in any way, indicate that a member is a liar inside here.
Under pain of death, I have no intention of withdrawing it. He is a liar.
Is our parliament's effectiveness being undermined by disorder and misbehavior?
But I am not particularly distressed by elements of rowdiness because I have looked at parliaments around the world. Jamaica is certainly not at the base for bad behavior. If only they would get the work done. Behavior in the Jamaican Parliament is the towing the party line too excessively and thinking of themselves as cheerleaders for their minister's presentation or hecklers from the opposition rather than serious debating.
And in Jamaica every day we talk about the concerns about how we resolve conflict and how in the communities and in the districts we don't seem to be able to talk without violence. And you wonder to yourself if in the House and in the Parliament that our leaders cannot exercise a certain control to pay themselves and their colleagues and the Speaker of the House a certain level of respect, then you wonder about what's happening in the rest of the community. So for the children's sake, and for just our own sense of self.
But how is the Parliament doing otherwise?
Now, these subcommittees meet faithfully, and every single year they provide the Parliament with a synopsis of all the concerns relating to major waste, maladministration. This is supposed to be tabled and then given back to the Parliament to discuss. And after those debates, policy decisions are taken to resolve to make sure they do not recur. After the Parliament debates, it should really go on to the Cabinet discusses it, and then it filters back down into the ministries to correct the problems we have. Now, one of the major problems and dysfunctions with that is, I think going back 10 years, looking at our research, we have not found one instance where in getting those reports faithfully from the committees, the Parliament has ever debated and discussed these issues. And for us, that represents a major dysfunction.
We can assess the performance of a parliament by objective standards and not simply by gut feelings. We can examine the frequency of sittings, the extent to which legislation is undertaken during those sittings. We can look at the annual output of the laws, and we can also look at a very critical factor, the backlog on the order paper from one year to the next. When you examine these factors, the Jamaican Parliament is not particularly productive. It sits for 1 or 2 afternoons per week over part of the year with a long summer recess and a long end of year recess. The output is about 25, 26 on average pieces of legislation per year with an enormous backlog. Many items on the backlog being private members' motions.
Kelisha Williams for All Angles.
Thanks so much, Kelisha. Let me just start at the beginning, though, before we get into all of that, because Andre Horne, you're a new senator. Does the Parliament, and I don't mean your party, whatever your party does Parliament have an orientation program for new parliamentarians?
What do you consider an orientation program to be? Yeah, not necessarily. What
I don't mean
happens is that when I went to the upper house for the first time, I got some documents, and these documents were basically my orientation, and they stated, like, for example, what's expected of me, documents that I should bring to them, as well as, you know, the basically procedures and things that will take place. I think that the orientation would come from your compatriots, the members of your party who already understand the political process, and they are there now to help to guide you as to how to approach the entire parliament itself.
Really? Madam AG, let me ask you, you think that's sufficient? Because I've heard complaints.
There is an orientation program in the parliament. Unfortunately, not everyone attends it. So when you are either appointed or elected and sworn in, you do get a package with your standing orders and a copy of the Constitution. And you are advised of a scheduled event where, with the parliamentary staff and sometimes with the assistance of outside experts, and you go through a process. How many turn up? You know, you can check the record. Is that enough? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think what Parliament is supposed to do requires a lot of understanding of processes. And if you come in unprepared and you don't know how to figure it out, you're basically not going to make the kind of contribution that you should make to passing laws for peace, order, and good government.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that in terms of the passage of laws, because we heard Martin Henry comment on the output. Julian Robinson, let me ask you, I have never been able to figure it out, and I've been asking for years, why can't Parliament meet more? Why can't the committees meet more? And before I get the spiel about the new Parliament building, I can't understand why we can't rent a room somewhere and designate it another parliamentary chamber for another committee to meet.
No, I think Parliament can meet more. I think the issues with laws are not just about Parliament, but it's the preparatory work that needs to be done before it gets to Parliament. And often the issue is that Chief Parliamentary Council always has a backlog in terms of preparing bills to come to Parliament. Yes, I think we can meet more than one day a week. There are physical constraints in terms of the committees and meetings, but I mean, committees have met outside of the Parliament building. But I think a lot of work, more work has to be done in the preparatory stage to ensure that when a bill comes to Parliament, it is all the deliberations, all the processes have been thought through to allow for the parliamentarians to deliberate on them.
Yeah. Matty Samud, are you satisfied with the output?
Well, coming in on the back end, I think, after everyone else. But first point made, there is an orientation process, and to be frank, I'd say there's constant engagement by the parliament.
Orientation for some people and no orientation for others.
Well, the parliament also
let me just say that one of the reasons I asked is that I heard 2 MPs, one from either party, saying they didn't feel they were properly grounded.
Yeah, and I know I was not. So,
but there's a difference when you come in.
And I'd love a chance to speak.
Midterm.
If I could be so allowed as we allow Senator Horne to speak in his maiden presentation the other day. The fact is there is an orientation process. What I've found with the Parliament is that that orientation process genuinely has not contemplated midterm appointments in a particular way. And I've seen it in certainly even in the lower house and in the upper house, where there's the parliamentary term and the parliamentary staff puts a lot into that first week or first 2 weeks when you're getting into a new parliamentary cycle, and doesn't necessarily contemplate or have the same procedures when they're midterm appointments or the results of by-elections, which is a weakness. But I can't say that there's not a process. There is a weakness in and gaps in how that orientation takes place. And I don't genuinely believe that that gap in terms of that orientation space comes from the parliamentary staff or the clerks of the House or the committees. In many ways, it comes from the fact that your own party has they have senior members, they have members that have been there for decades, and I haven't found, and I've, even with my own conversations and with persons on the other side, that you have that mentorship type program that speaks to parliamentary craft, that speaks to how you get into the systems of parliament. As you asked about the output of parliament,
all right, hold
we have to look at the input into parliament.
Hold the point about the output. We'll get to that in our next segment. We're going to break. Remember, our hashtag is TVJ. All angles soon come.